Well, I haven't got the signal, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, um, today we're going to talk about a subject that a lot of churches don't want to deal with, or maybe it's because they don't know how to deal with it. Okay, it's a sensitive subject. It's one that it's heavy. People don't want to talk about, but then preparedness reduces or eliminates a lot of that. Okay. When you talk about security in the church. Also, when you talk about security in the church, first thing people think about is what? Somebody coming in blasting away, right? Or protecting our kids. And those are two big ones, okay? But today we're going to talk about much more than that. We're going to go into some other things that are affecting churches nationally, actually around the world. So we're going to go ahead and get into it, and let's just pray. God, we just thank you for today. We thank you, Lord, for everybody represented here. We thank you, Lord, for their churches, their ministries. We thank you, Lord, if they're in the area of helps. God, we just thank you that today will be, it'll be just productive. We thank you, Lord, it'll be all of you and none of me. We thank you, Lord, the things that need to be answered, discussed today. You'll help us to bring it forth and clear it up today, God. And we just thank you for it now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. For too long, like I said before, churches and ministers have failed to prepare for a disaster or maybe have a resumption plan or have something in place that an event would happen at their church, okay? And I, of course, when I worked directly for AFCM for a number of years, that's what I did. I helped put in background check programs for AFCM. I got to be the guy that answered questions if somebody that wanted to be a youth leader and maybe they had something in their background or, or something where maybe a negative situation. I handle those kind of things, and I still do. I assist the ministry with those type of things, when those things pop up. But and then also I've had in my career, I've been in the realm of corporate investigations and some form of law enforcement, corporate security. The church that I attend in Tulsa, we have a real good security program. We have a number of volunteers. We also have staff security, and then we also have, we pay local law enforcement off duty every service as well, okay? Now, the question that comes up quite frequently is this: Elvis, where do we need to be? Where do we need to be? I mean, what do you see? Okay, and here's what I see. I see churches that are in avoidance, and I see paranoia. Okay? On that scale, where do you think I see most churches? Avoidance. Avoidance. Because people don't know how to get started. They don't know what to do. They don't know, maybe is this legal? And then two, the biggest thing when it comes to avoidance is this: it'll never happen to us. You go to any of the training, whether it's watchdog, sheepdog, all these organizations that do church security, every one of them will tell you that that's the number one thing they face with churches, ministries, youth ministries, whatever it is. It'll never happen to us. Well, that mentality will get you in trouble. It'll get you in trouble from the aspect of maybe you have an active shooter or something like that, or it may get you into trouble with you got somebody that's working for you that's got something in their background, or maybe somebody that do something to a kid that you're not prepared to handle. So, on the other hand, I've seen paranoia. I know churches, we laugh about it all the time, and maybe it's okay to be in the realm of paranoia. I know of churches where some of them are large churches, some are not. Pastor doesn't come out till praise and worship starts, okay? And there's three armed guards on either side of them, okay? They do the altar call, pastor walks off the stage, his 6 guys get up with him and his wife and walk out, okay? Never smell like the sheep, and I'm not going to get into that. But the realm of paranoia, okay? So what we're going to talk about today is some practical things, and I've got 20 questions that we're going to get into here in a little bit, and I'm going to ask the 20 questions. Don't answer me. I want you to think about your church, your ministry, and think about, do you have this? Are you prepared? Do we have a system in place? Do we have that level of deterrence, if you will, in place? You know, a couple of years ago, there was an organization that did a study about having an off-duty police officer on campus, or a car, or even just having a vehicle. They made it look like an unmarked police car. They just went and put some lights on top. Guess what? Major deterrent. Because the bad guy drives on your property, he sees a car sitting out there, they've got somebody here, okay? Let me ask you a question. Active shooter. Greater chance they come in shooting at a bigger church or smaller church? Smaller. Because the bigger church, they think they're going to have security in place, okay? So they're going to choose the smaller church the majority of the time, okay? I'm going to give you a few statistics that I want you to think about. A mass shooting is considered 4 people or more. Gun violence every year is on the increase. In churches, it's on the increase every year. Has been for the last 10 years. This year, there's been 155 mass shootings in 2018. 155. That's up from 135, 136 this time last year. Church shootings are up, okay? Now, I definitely believe in the number one thing that we need to do as churches is be praying and prayed up before every service. One thing we tell our guys is pray before you get here. You know what I mean? If you know we've been spirit-led, there's been times when somebody's walked in the door and somebody has already had something about that person or whatever. So be prayed up. That's the number one thing. All right. To talk about, mass shootings, I'm going to talk a little bit about the number one thing that I hear all the time is about concealed carry. And the reason people do concealed carry is because they don't want to pay, or maybe they don't have in the budget to pay an off-duty police officer. The question always comes up, do I need to have somebody armed in the church? Yeah. My recommendation is you don't open the door unless you got somebody. Many times they've had church shootings. There's not been anybody there. Now the question is, who do you have? Who do you trust? Okay? The scenario goes like this. Is the percentages show church shootings, 95% of all church shootings are down the center aisle. Why? They want to be seen. Okay? So could you imagine you've got 10 people sitting in the sanctuary, 5 on this side, 5 on this side. Some of you guys are ex-military, you know what I'm talking about. Or maybe you're ex-law enforcement. Or you had some type of training. You get some guy coming down the aisle. You got 3 or 4 people sitting on the other side of the aisle. What happens? Heart rate starts going, right? Blood starts pumping. You're not getting in there to the brain. Boom, 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 shooting across the aisle. There's grandma sitting over there. The point of it is this. You need to know if you're allowing somebody to be concealed carrying in your church, you need to know who they are. You need to make sure you're sending them to training. And you need to make sure that you have them sign a waiver. You can go to your attorney, insurance company, basically saying you didn't hire them to come in and do this. Because what's going to happen is, and it may be a justified shooting. Let's say somebody walks in, somebody turns around, guy's coming down the aisle with a shotgun, pow, you take him down, it's justified, you got your concealed carry license and all that. There's going to be some legal stuff, Okay? Now, well, Pastor Tom hired me. Pastor Tom told me, okay, so now they're going to come to Pastor Tom. Like I said, it's going to be justified, probably going to be all right. There's going to be some fees. There's going to be some things. There's going to be some press. There's going to be some whatever, okay? One of the things that we had drawn up at our church is anybody that was approved, they signed something basically saying the church did not hire them. They're doing it of their own free will. You know, how far that will go in court, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that's something that our church attorneys recommended, okay? Okay, you know, we live in a time that, you know, we got to be spiritually and physically prepared. Your liability is lowered on any situation, whether it's an accident at your church, a shooting at your church, alleged abuse, whatever it is. Your level of liability is limited when you have policies and procedures in place. We're going to talk about some of those. You got to know the who, the what, the where, the hows, anytime you open the door. You know, as leadership, as pastors, maybe you're in leaders, you know, in helps leadership. You know, here's the thing. It comes back on us every time we open those doors. You know, and having security is like having life insurance or medical insurance. You know what? You may go a year, you never need it, right? But guess what? When you do, it's good to have it, okay? You know, we're going to talk a little bit about the number one thing affecting churches right now is domestic violence. I was at a training here a while back, and they talked about domestic violence. And yeah, it's at the church, it's everywhere. But one of the reasons you see a lot at the church is because they're going to think they come to the church and get help, okay? One of the big questions is protective orders, restraining orders, okay? You need to know your state, what your state recommends. You have the right in most states to either enforce it or not enforce it. In our state, we have that option. Somebody comes in, a lady comes in with a protective order, my husband beat me up, he shot in our house, me and the kids, he shot at us. Yes, that's happened. Here's a protective order, restraining order. Would you please enforce it? Yes. Guy actually showed up at church. We politely asked him, you know, to leave. So one of the things with domestic violence is there's never one that goes the same way. They're normally bad. There's normally kids involved. So learn a little bit about domestic violence laws in your state, about protective orders in your state, but also be prepared in how to handle domestic violence situations. A number of the churches in Tulsa have dealt with this, with domestic violence. I'm talking about on the grounds. We have on the grounds, in the building. Guy shows up. I mean, we just had one 2 or 3 weeks ago. They're going through a divorce. Ex-husband goes and sits in the parking lot, waits for her to come out of the front door with her and her boyfriend. I mean, there's some of these things that when it comes to domestic violence can turn I'm talking about on a dime. That's why you need to be prepared. And we're going to have, hopefully leave some time at the end today so we can talk about it if you have some questions about some of this stuff. When they talk about training, I know there's programs out there where people or organizations are going around and they'll say, I'll come to your church, I'll train your church for $10,000, $8,000, whatever it is. So people ask me all the time, what do you think about that? And I will be the first to tell you those guys are good, okay? They really are. But I will also tell you this. You can go to your local sheriff's department. You can go to your local police department. Normally they have people that will either volunteer and come in on a Saturday morning and spend 2 or 3 hours with you. Maybe they'll do an hour or two today. They'll come back next month, do an hour or two. Sometimes they may charge you a couple of $100. Most of the time they do it free because they want to come in and help, okay? One of the things I recommend to churches, especially smaller churches, guess what? Go to your local station near your church. Go down there and take this dude a dozen donuts, some cookies. You think I'm kidding? Somebody bakes a pie, cake, whatever it is. Take it down there and tell them who you are. Invite them and say, hey, you guys out and about on Sunday? You need coffee? Stop by the church. We'll have coffee for you. If you ever need to use the restrooms, whatever it is, guess what? People see that car sitting in your parking lot. That's free. Okay? Have them stop in on a Sunday. You know, maybe have some ladies in the church make something for them. I'm telling you, cops like to eat. Make something, give it to them on a Sunday morning or whatever it is. They'll stop by and guess, you get to you get to know them. You get to know all the guys in your area. They will start, you being nice to them, they'll start just coming by checking on you. You guys all right? I'm serious. Those are little things you can do that don't cost you money that will help you add security to your church, okay? Another thing is service reports. Don't have to answer me. At your church, do you do service reports? If you do, great. And let me tell you what I've seen. I've seen this happen at probably at least 3 to 4 churches, all in the Midwest. One particular church, the church was accused of doing something. Oh, well, I'll take that back. This one, a little girl was supposedly injured while in the care of children's ministry. They do a service report, every service, every area, whether it's nursery, children, youth, JV, high school, whatever, they do a service report. And that service report is the date, how many kids, any incidents, yes or no, circle it. If so, brief description, okay? It also has on there weather. Why? If you have to go to court, it's showing, number one, how thorough and detailed you were, okay? Number two, if it was a situation where the kids were playing outside, let's say they accuse you and it was snowing that day. Well, my daughter got injured on the slide. No, we weren't outside that day. There was a tornado that day, whatever it is. The point of it is that think that it's detailed, but it only takes a couple of minutes to fill it out, okay? Also, let's say somebody does get injured. Let's say little Susie did twist her ankle out there on the playground. You document it. Let's say you have to, 6 months later, your insurance comes up or their attorney comes up, whatever it is. It just, again, shows that you're detailed and you're prepared, okay? Getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I want to talk a little bit about cameras, okay? Cameras are absolutely the best thing you can put in your church, your facility, whatever it is. One camera will cover 10, 15 people. It works all day long and there's no overtime, okay? I have seen cameras absolutely save churches. And I'm not talking about big churches. Springfield, Missouri, there was a church. Pastor was asleep. Some of you probably heard me tell the story, but the pastor was asleep one morning, one night, and the Lord woke him up and said, I want you to put cameras in your church. He went back to sleep. A little bit later, woke up. There it was again. Put cameras in your church. So he goes, okay, this is God. So he got up and wrote it down. Next day, he called, had his security company come out, and they put in cameras throughout his church. Kids areas, everywhere, okay? Wasn't that big a church, so it ended up being like 15, 20 cameras. Fast forward a couple of months. Monday morning, he's sitting there. 2 guys walk in suits. And they want to speak with him. So, sure. Well, they show him their badges. They're from the local police department. You had a little girl here a few weeks ago that was molested during a church service. Now, how many of you know You can have the most loyal people in the world in your church, but the minute it comes to their child may have been molested, guess what? It's over, okay? Anyway, so he's sitting there talking to him, and he remembers that he has a camera system. He said, what day was this? So the police give him the date. He said, I got video. So they go back and pull the video. They see that family come into church that day. They see that family drop that little girl off in the kids area. They see that little girl in the kids area the whole time. They see the family pick up that little girl, and they see them leave. So the cop says, let's go to the next Sunday. Maybe they got their dates wrong. Because, you know, you're in a situation when you're accused of a child, something happening to a child, you're guilty until proven innocent. One expert says you're guilty, you're never proven innocent. Your level of guilt is reduced, never eliminated. Anyway, so they go to that Sunday. The next Sunday, they weren't even there. They go to the Sunday before. The same thing. The child was in there. Guess what? That mom and dad got arrested for filing a false police report. Okay? Another church had cameras in their kids' areas. A little girl, mom calls the church that Sunday afternoon, said, my daughter was molested this morning. We got her home. There's evidence. Without going into graphic detail, they immediately go to the church, start watching video. Guess what happened? You know those little toys that you stack the rings on? There's video of that little girl falling on that toy. I'm sad the child got hurt. But guess what? If they wouldn't have had video, that church wouldn't be in existence today. Your name, you would never be the same. Your name would never be the same anywhere. Even though it was a totally innocent situation, your name would never be the same because you wouldn't have been able to prove that that child did not get molested. Now think about those teachers that are in that room. Okay? So when it comes to protecting everything, you know, the people, the assets, the children, what God's entrusted you with, I always like to say use every element that you can. Okay? Cameras are absolutely one of the best, least expensive options that you can put. And guess what? You can put in 3 at a time. You can put in 2 at a time. You can put in 5, whatever it is that you can afford. You can put them in. Now they got systems you can lease. I recommend you buy them, they're yours. But guess what? If you can't afford that, get a system you can lease for $300 a month. I mean, and then you have 60 days, 90 days worth of coverage where you can go back and pull it. If you got somebody that's tech savvy in your church, you know you can pull 90 days. In the 90 days, have them flip in a DVD or whatever it is, record it, store it. Yeah. Okay? Now, talking about some things other than active shooter and child abuse, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that now. Let me tell you about some other things that are affecting churches. Now, this one's going to blow your mind. Confidentiality. How many of you worked in the healthcare industry? Anybody? Anybody know what HIPAA is? Yeah. Guess what? Churches now, a lot of churches now, remember the old days, we have a prayer line, somebody get healed, somebody comes up, what are you suffering from? You know, I got Snakatuka disease, whatever it is. And, okay, remember the days? Now you go up front, guess what? There's somebody standing there with a clipboard. They don't say it out loud because of confidentiality or HIPAA. Give you another example. Little Johnny. Parents bring little Johnny over to the kids area. Little Johnny's got something. Well, they tell the workers, and they're the volunteers, what's wrong with little Johnny? Well, the worker goes and tells somebody else in the church. Well, Sister So-and-so going to tell Sister So-and-so. Okay? They're having a salad at tea at lunchtime. She goes, did you hear the so-and-so? Well, now there's been a situation where people have come back and sued churches because the people shared confidential information. Or maybe it's confidential information about counseling. Okay? Confidentiality is a big one, okay, in churches. Another one, your documents. Any materials that you have. And let me explain. And this has happened in small churches, big churches. People are mad at God. They're mad at churches. Every church has got all this money. Okay? Pastor Jeff over here, you know he's got $8 million in the bank. Let's go check the trash. Seriously. That's why a number of churches now will either have a shredder or they will take their trash and have it shredded. I'm serious. You wouldn't think about this kind of stuff. Churches, schools, whatever it is. But confidentiality is a big, big, big issue in churches now, especially with counseling and with medical. Now, if somebody comes and tells you, that's fine. It's what you do after you get the information that's important. Okay? So, I'm gonna get into the questions here, and we'll talk a little bit about them. You know, one of the things that they say is one of the best deterrents, we talked about active shooter and all this kind of stuff, is, do you have an emergency response team at your church? That's the first question. Now, when I say emergency response team, I'm not talking about everybody's got a yellow hat and a yellow vest and, you know, something. I'm talking about you pick up 3 to 4 people in your church that you can trust, that you know they're solid, okay? It doesn't matter if it's a storm coming in. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, somebody got cut, accident, you know, or somebody maybe having a heart attack, whatever it is. But you've got a response team that knows what to do in the event of an emergency at your church. Let me ask you this. In your state, how many of you know what the laws are regarding defibrillators? Required, yes or no? It is. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of churches don't know this. In your state, it may require you to have defibrillators. A lot of churches don't know that. And then if you have them, you have to train people to use them. We had a situation in Tulsa where a man had a heart attack one morning. They had a defibrillator. It was one of the mobile ones. He went down. They put him in the aisle. They ran to the front of the church because they just got him. It was one of the mobile ones. They got it, ran back. A few of the people that had been trained wasn't there. So they had to go find somebody, come back. They get it open, you know, boom, whatever. Guess what? The family sued the church. Did they do everything they could? Yes. Did it reduce the liability? Yes. But by them having it was great. But and that's not to say, and I'm not speaking, you know, obviously death over this man, but not to say that if somebody would have been there, we don't know, you know, obviously, but it might have, and that's what the family chose to move with, okay? Find out what your state says about defibrillators. Listen, you can find them used now. Seriously, you can buy them from Z Medical. Obviously they've never been used. They've been in a box at a business and they upgraded. You know, you can call Z Medical. You can call a local fire department and say, hey, do you guys know of anybody that's got old defibrillators they're upgrading? Maybe the hospital's getting rid of theirs, the ones on the wall. We'll buy them. I mean, there's ways you can find used equipment. Your building, and that's the other thing when you find out if you have to have them or not. Find out what's required in your building besides your building. Maybe you're only required to have one. You get a mobile one. How good are your first aid kits for your emergency response team? Most churches will have that one you go to Walmart and buy in that little blue one. It's better than nothing. But some people go to Sam's and get the one that's like this. I think it's about $35, something like that. It's about this big, it's got everything. Or you can go get bigger than that. A lot of you know Pastor Tim Gilligan, right? I went down, I don't know, it's been, 4 years ago maybe, I think it was. I went down, I spent a couple of days with Tim Gilligan's security team and their volunteer team. And I got to tell you, I was absolutely blown away. I've never seen organization like that. I mean, when their volunteers check in, they've got a room and they've got, who the usher captain, the security captain, the emergency person. They've got mobile first aid kits. They've got wardens. They've got, for every service, they've got, and granted, I know they're a little bit larger church, but the organization, they've got forms. They got these little binders like this big, and now they probably moved away from paper, okay? Now they're probably got something electronic. But they had all their forms, service reports, incident reports, whatever it is. That's organized. And I got to thinking, this could be done on a smaller level too. But emergency response team is absolutely imperative at any size church, that you're prepared, you practice. Did you know that even the larger churches, and we're going to talk about fire drills here in a minute, or if you live where I live, tornado drills. But even your larger churches, they really don't like doing fire drills because you don't want to freak people out, right? Do you have a plan? Something happened in your church. Do you know how we're going to get mass? It could be mass hysteria. You know what I mean? The building's firing over, everybody gets up. Well, everybody knows you got to get out. But what's the plan? Somebody in control. I got this side of the building, we're going out this door. I got this side of the building, we're going to go out that door. We're going to meet over on that side of the building, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit more about how you do kids and all that stuff too. Okay, let's talk a little bit about policies and procedures. Your kids' areas. Then don't answer me. I just want you thinking. Do you have policies and procedures for your children's areas? In other words, no men working in the nursery, or 2 people taking kids to the bathroom, or background checks are performed every year. Even though we'll talk a bit more about background checks too. What's your policy? What's your procedures related to if you find something negative in somebody's background? Being consistent, okay? In other words, if I got Larry and Joe, and Larry over here has got something negative, and I got Joe's got something negative, depends on what it is. And yes, you have to get that detail sometimes. But the basic policies and procedures regarding taking kids to the bathroom, who's allowed in there, in the event this happens, do you have policies and procedures? And again, it can be bullet points. You don't have to get into, and we have some things with AFCM that I developed. You can contact Desi for them. That's good. It's matter of fact, I had the person at Tim Gilligan's church help me. Winters King and Associates has approved it, so you don't have to necessarily recreate on some of that stuff. But policies and procedures are huge, because in the event you have an allegation or something like that, first thing they're going to ask you for is if you have them. If you have them, you need to be following them. If you're not following them, that's worse than not having them. Seriously, it is. But my recommendation is have policies and procedures related to your kids' areas. Have policies and procedures related to counseling. Okay? We'll get more into that too. Allegations of abuse. It can absolutely cripple your church, as I've talked a little bit about before. So being prepared for allegations of abuse. How do you handle it? I'm not telling you how to handle it, but what my recommendations are, certain people talk, okay? Because it's going to hit the media, okay? You don't want, because the media's going to show up. There's going to be somebody. You always hear the joke. Y'all know who Sweet Brown is, right? Remember Sweet Brown, the lady from Tulsa a few years ago from Oklahoma City, that when she walked outside, she got rich and famous for going, good Lord, that's a fire. Remember her? You don't want, not trying to be mean to Sweet Brown, but you don't want the media talking to Sweet Brown about if there was an allegation of abuse because of rumors. Have a designated person in your church in the event something happens that talks to the media. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's, your husband or wife. Maybe it's, like I said, somebody you can trust. But allegations of abuse, what do? You contact your attorney first, okay? You contact your insurance company. Let them direct you in what you do in the event of allegations of abuse. And it doesn't have to be abuse. It could be injury. It could be whatever, okay? Speaking of injury, what's the 2 words you never say if somebody gets injured on your property? Does anyone know? Huh? Our fault. Yeah, you never say that for sure. That's a good one. You never say I'm sorry. Why? You own it. Okay? That's one thing that for years and years and years, every place I've worked, they've taught us that somebody's injured, you try to give them the best care you can. You always call 911. It always reduces liability when you call 911, or it eliminates liability on your part, because once the ambulance gets there, if they choose not to go, guess what? It's not on you, okay? But in the event of an accident, you never say I'm sorry. You offer them all the care you can. Somebody goes down, never fails. You get 15 people going to show up trying to help, right? Oh, prop his head up. Go give me some orange juice. Get some water. No. You never give anybody anything when they go down. You wait till the ambulance gets there. There's been situations where at churches, schools, somebody went down, they gave them orange juice. Guess what? Worst thing they should have given them. So you don't give them anything until the ambulance gets there. You make them comfortable. Let's get them up. No. If the person gets up on their own, fine. You don't get them up. I know I'm getting a little bit off track here, but I really felt like I was supposed to share that. But just remember that policies and procedures, be ready. Always have a plan in place for allegations of any type of abuse or wrongdoing. Are you performing effective background checks? Is your screening process thorough? How often are you doing background checks? I know a number of churches do background checks. We do them every 3 years. Nope, you need to do them every year. Every year. I know it's a cost. I know it's an expense. There are churches doing them every 6 months. You're exactly right. Yes, there are churches doing them every 6 months. And guess what? They found stuff. That's why it's important to do them every year. Budget it. And I don't know, there's a number of them out there, Checkpoint, Wright. There's a ton of them out there. And I don't know who you're using, but make sure you're doing them. Sometimes you may have to go a little beyond. Make sure, I don't know if we have anybody here from California or not, but you got to make sure when you're doing background checks, it's somebody that's licensed to run a background check in California. The other thing I want to bring up is that I've seen in churches, one of the big ones is this. Whenever you do a background check on somebody, our attorneys, Winter King & Associate, recommend that you have them sign at least 2 forms. They sign the form for the background check company to do their background check, and they sign a form with your church letterhead on it saying, I give this church permission to run my background check. And actually, I think the statement says something to the effect of, I give them full authority to investigate, research my history. It may include criminal, credit, personal, whatever it is. Why should they sign 2 forms? Let me tell you why. This is what I've seen multiple times. You run a background check on somebody. Well, maybe they lived in another state. Let's say they lived in Washington State. Well, they moved to Texas. Run a background check. They don't think you're going to pick up anything that happened in Washington State. Well, guess what? You find it. Now you confront them and say, I'm sorry, sir, you cannot work in our kids' area. What? Well, what do you mean? Well, because of this and this and that. That never happened. Why are you running? I never gave you permission to go back to Washington. I never gave you permission. Yeah, you did. You signed the back here. They signed this form. I didn't sign that. Well, guess what? You also signed one with this with a witness on this date. The two signatures match. One of the things is what most churches do is the one that they sign with the background check company, they keep in one file with all the volunteers. The one they sign with your church letterhead on it, you keep that one separate. You got proof in the event they try to say, once you find something negative, see, the game changes. So have them sign a different form, two different forms with a witness. Yes, you did. You signed this on April 18th. And guess what? Shuts it down just like that, okay? Make sure your background check company is thorough. Make sure your reports come back. One of the things that popped up this year is when you run a background check, they find something negative. A lot of the background check companies now will do a letter on their own to the person. Now, it's up to you whether you want that sent to you or if you want it sent to them. But a lot of them will create the letter stating, we found this, you know, and it's not coming from you, it's coming from the background check company. I would just check and see if yours, you know, offers such a service, okay? And move on here. Let's see, defibrillators we talked about. When's the last time you met with your insurance company, your attorney, regarding your coverage at your church or your ministry? This is something churches fail to do. I recommend, not me, I recommend, professionals recommend you do this annually. Now, I've also seen churches get dropped by their insurance companies because they are not performing background checks or they're not doing the training. Your insurance companies will, most of your insurance companies will require that you do training once a year, okay? And everybody that works with children, et cetera, have to go through this training before. Yes, I have seen, matter of fact, we had an AFCM church a while back. They got dropped. Hey, my insurance company dropped me. Well, are you doing training? Oh, well, no, I didn't know I had to. Well, if they would have checked, they would have known they had to do, and I hate to call it molestation training because it sounds like you're trained on being, you know, a molester. In molestation awareness training, you need to be doing that at least once a year with all of your people, okay? Also find out if your coverage has changed on that type of stuff, okay? Do you have a social media or a cybersecurity policy in place? If you work with youth especially, a lot of churches now will have a policy in place. For instance, you got a young guy, 25 years old, he's a youth leader. They don't talk to girls through social media. Also, who in your church is putting things on social media? You'll see now, a lot of churches have social media policies in place, okay? Here's a big one. Who is assigned at your church or ministry to verify church records, whether it may be financial records, giving records, background checks, whoever? Who in your ministry or your church has permission or has access to your information? Something you need to think about. Obviously, it's not something you're going to open up to anybody and everybody, but you need to know who's got access to it in the event something gets leaked, et cetera. Are your records backed up? This is another big one with churches. Let's say something happens. We pray it doesn't, obviously, but let's say something happens and your records are destroyed. Where are they backed up? A number of the churches are hiring companies like an Iron Mountain or There's the cloud. I don't know how much you trust the cloud, but they take their data, they send it somewhere and have it backed up in another state. They put it on a disk, whatever it is. It's backed up in the event you could get to it if you had to have it, okay? What about something happens in your area and you can't have church at your building? I know in Tulsa, and it's not just by certain denominations, but in Tulsa, there's some churches have agreements with each other that if something happens, you can use our church in the afternoon, vice versa. They have an agreement like that. Or maybe they share vans or whatever it is. So there's some things to be prepared and talk about, okay? I talked about active shooter response training. Reach out and try to get that in your area if you can. Have you ever thought about, this is something so simple. Where's the safest areas in your church in the event you had an active shooter, if you had a tornado? You ever thought about that? Where's the safest place you can get people to? Okay? Can your kids' area be secured in the event of a fire or a shooting? I know a number of churches in the last couple of years, they've put in those metal doors in the entrance to their kids' areas in the event they have an active shooter. Or maybe if they put the fire retardant stuff up. I mean, just some things to think about. Let's see. Do you have a system in place to account for your kids in the event something happened? Well, say you had a fire alarm. You had to get your kids out of the building. Where are your kids going to be? Where can parents go pick them up? In your system where you check your kids in, can you print off a report? You know, there's Church One, what are some of the ones out there? I can't remember them all. But maybe you just have a manual system with all the kids' names on it. You need to have something in place to say, if something happens, we can take all of our kids across the street, mom and dad can come over, and you check them off as they pick them up, okay? I know it seems odd to talk about that, but there's some things you need to have in place. Yeah, when was the last time you had a fire drill? When's the last time you checked your fire extinguishers? First aid kits, we talked about that. Emergency exit signs, something so simple. Do you have emergency exit signs? There's one right there, I'm looking at there, obviously on battery backup. Something so simple is exit signs. Do you have emergency lighting? Do you have lighted ways to get people out of the door? Who has a flashlight? I mean, I've actually seen this. It happened at our church. There's security guys, police officers had great flashlights, you know. We've talked a bunch, we haven't done it. We've talked about putting things on the floor that light up kind of like a movie theater in the event. We've got things on the wall now that, you know, will provide some light. But these things I've talked about today are all some basic things, some more complex than others, but there are things that we're faced with today that we didn't have to worry about 5 years ago. 28,000 gun incidents this year. 155 mass shootings, but 28,000 gun incidents. That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. But that's the time we live in. The last thing I want to talk about before you guys have any questions is a big one. I actually met with a lady who's the head of security at, y'all know Mark Brzee. The lady that was head of security at Mark Brzee's church, and she is a hostage negotiator, ex-hostage negotiator. She deals with all this kind of stuff. Anyway, she's been trained in how to deal with the mentally ill. One of the things I recommend, there's this training they offer in almost every area. You guys call the hospitals, maybe the sheriff's department, and find out where you can attend this training. Believe me, I didn't know a lot about it. I had family members that dealt with some things like this. And I've learned a lot by listening to some of these classes, okay? I'll give you an example. When a person's got a mental issue and they're taking their medicine, they're normal to you and me, but guess what? They're not to themselves. So when they're off their meds, obviously, we know things aren't right, okay? But they feel normal. But that's also when they feel empowered. That's why when they can get a gun, they want to take it out on somebody lots of times. I mean, there's a lot of things I've learned. I mean, there's actually, this one's going to shock you. There's actually churches out there that will keep cigarettes because they've learned that if a person smokes and they have a mental issue, it has the opposite effect on it would you or me. I mean, just some weird things. But the mentally ill, dealing with the mentally ill in churches, that and domestic violence is two of the largest things, biggest things that churches are dealing with today. So we got about 3 minutes. So anybody have any questions or ideas, thoughts?
You touched on it, but one of the things that popped up for us was with your cyber policy and social networks, is that your church takes pictures of kids at events.
That's right.
And posts them.
Yep.
The way we were advised, and Elvis, I'll defer to you,
Nope.
is instead of getting permission slips, the best thing to do is we were advised post a note that pictures could be taken, might be taken and posted on our social
Yep.
network.
Yep.
Announce it.
Yep. And there are churches out there that once you go through membership, church membership, they have you sign something saying that you give us permission to videotape your child that may show on the internet, YouTube, TV, whatever it is. That's true. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good one. Yep.
You're talking about like when kids come in and accuse church people of abusing them. What if it's the opposite? What if you have a kid come in and say, Mom and Dad's abusing me? Should we be having
Great
that
one.
be mandatory?
Mandatory. You have to, as a church, as a ministry, you have to report it.
But do we need to have them certified mandatory reporters through the state?
You have to have what? I'm sorry.
But you have to have them certified mandatory reporters through the state? Because there's training you can take
Yep.
to become a mandatory reporter. Should we be
No.
requiring that?
You can require it if you want to, it's not necessary. It happens with us, and we have our people report it. We call DHS. I just had one about a month ago. A boy reported, teenage boy, him and his dad. And so we just called DHS, called the 1-800 number. We reported it. They said, we'll take it from here. Here's the case number. Where you get into trouble, I'm so glad you asked that. Where you get into trouble, if you know something and don't report it, yeah. I mean, you all know we've had 2 incidents in Tulsa, 2 big churches. One of them, it crippled. Sad. I know you know, Pastor Dave, it crippled Grace Church. I mean, it's a sad situation. They didn't report it.
Yeah, I got one big scenario. You said don't touch the person who falls down because he got hurt, sick or something. But you have a doctor and he can give him immediate attention. Does the church allow him to do that?
If he's a doctor,
Yeah.
and you know he's a proven medical doctor,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Because the Good Samaritan thing comes on them then.
Okay,
But if you know they're a doctor.
Yeah, if
Now,
you know
somebody
they're a
walked up and they stayed at a Holiday Inn last night,
He's in
you
the
know.
congregation. We
You
know he's a
know,
doctor.
yeah.
Okay.
You don't know him, I wouldn't let him.
Because we're going to go, no, you can't touch him.
Right.
Like I mentioned now, pretty much kind of one of some evangelistic aspect. How would protecting yourself so far, a lot of missionaries and AFCM organization and evangelists, how would you say areas that we need to tighten up in those areas for security?
You mean as people working for them or working?
No, just being an evangelist or.
Uh-huh.
See, my wife and I, we do ministry conferences and so forth with married couples and so forth in different cities, different places. So you kind of hit some of the areas that might, I think have much time that we probably should make sure that we're covered in specific areas.
Well, it's a little bit different in that situation. I mean, the one thing I would do is if you're traveling, going into different churches, and I'm assuming that's what you're talking about? Yeah, as you're going into these churches, is that I would say more falls on you having ground rules to protect yourself. You know what I mean? Of what you're going to be exposed to and all that. We'll talk more about that offline.